if there's no questions, my keyboard froze. There we go. If there's no questions, I'll move on. But on the right, you'll see an example of the disparity of buffs and how much damage it can do. Somebody said, yeah, Senates do give debuffs. Senate's something you get a little bit later, closer to keep 35. But so this is about generals. Just a quick thing. There's a lot of confusion about assistant generals. If you want a fun fact, when they came out, their gear actually worked for assistant generals, but it really fucked the game up for about a week, and they decided no more gear on assistant generals. So gear doesn't work. I didn't put this in that slide, but gear doesn't work on assistant generals. So that being said, the main general, all books, all abilities, all specifications, all dragons, everything works on the main general. So you want to put all your good stuff on him. The assistant general, basically skill books, I'll just read these points, but the skill books apply, but they don't stack. So you can't take a plus 25% attack for whatever troop type and put it on your main and then put it on your assistant general and expect to get plus 50% attack. It only works on one general, so the books don't stack with each other. So typically on my main general, you'll see plus attack, defense, and HP, percentage for the tier 4 book, which is 25%. And then on the supporting general, typically I do ranged sends. So you're going to see ranged range increase, march size increase, and then march speed increase. Not the soldier speed increase, but the march speed increase. There's a difference. The march speed is how fast it travels on the map. The soldier speed is how fast the soldiers travel in the simulated battle. That being said, the soldier speed books don't work, so don't use them. It's just a waste of a skill book. So in the assistant general, only the golden ability applies. So you can, I completely forgot the term, but you can red star your generals. I know most of you know what that is. Oh, ascend. You can ascend your generals, but it doesn't, and it gives you additional abilities for your generals, but it doesn't apply for assistant generals. So you can still ascend them, but their abilities won't work, essentially. Specifications apply for your generals. It's those circles on the bottom of the generals. It's a new thing, so not all generals have them, but those do apply for the assistants. The basic stats of the generals don't apply, so there's no point in cultivating an assistant general because cultivation is just the leadership, attack, politics, whatever, and they don't apply. Yes, yeah. Oh, yeah, that's true. So a good point that Zoro made is there's something called covenants in the game, and one general has covenants with different generals. A covenant, the definition of covenant means holy pact. Those covenants are too hard for me to explain. Basically, there's levels of the covenant that increase something. So like Merlin, for example, has a covenant with Beowulf. So at 10,000 aggregate stats between the two, you unlock something. And then like at 12,000, 14,000, 16,000, whatever the number is. But just Merlin alone and a Beowulf doesn't unlock, I don't even think the first tier. But if you max out Beowulf, get him all the way leveled up, and then cultivate him, you unlock a few tiers of the covenant. So that's how it works, to give you guys an idea. I can explain covenants more if you want. They're useful. They're not like, a game-changing thing that'll make you an amazing player, out of nothing. But it's something to be cognizant of. And then dragons and beasts don't apply. So your assistant general, you don't want to stick a dragon on them because it's a waste of a dragon. It's not going to do anything. And then just the last, thing to mention is you should, with your generals in general, no pun intended, focus on one troop type. You're going to get a lot more results out of a very focused attack of ranged, let's say, with a bunch of layers, than you would buffing every single troop type and then sending a big mixed march. It really doesn't work. A much more efficient way to do it is to send all of one troop type and then do a rally. So you might have somebody send ranged, you might have somebody send siege, you might have somebody send ground, you might have somebody sending just players. I wouldn't send cavalry, but you can send cavalry too. So hopefully that gives you guys an idea of generals and what works and what doesn't work. Feel free to take a photo with this and of this, in case you forget. You can look it up too. I mean, it's on the internet, but just to get the information out there, it's useful to know. Let me see if. Oh, I see, Zora. So that's all I had for generals. It was just a quick overview to inform anybody who might not know. So this is the little strategies slide I put together. I already explained ghosting a bit. Let me see if anybody sent me a question. Oh no, so maybe I said that unclearly. You should only have one buff type on your generals when you send an attack. I was just explaining rallies. We can get more into rallies later, but when you send an attack, it's a lot more efficient to buff a single thing. And in general, you want to work on all your buffs in research. But when it comes to gear and generals, you want to really focus on one thing because you're going to get a lot better results than sending a mixed march of everything. That's really it. I mean, I could really go into the math if we wanted to, but it's kind of pointless and it'll confuse people. All you need to know is you should, like, if you're sending archers, you should have as much buffs for archers as you possibly can. Or if you're sending ground, you should focus on ground. You shouldn't do multiple different types of troops at once. Okay, great. Yeah, feel free to ask questions. I highly encourage it. So, ghosting, I already gave a brief explanation, but ghosting is when you basically send all your troops out of the keep. It's very common. I mean, everybody ghosts. It's a very common strategy to get the high tier, typically cavalry, out of your base. That's what I do in Battlefield because cavalry have a very low health pool. They're best for monster hunting because they can, alpha strike a monster, basically do a single strike on a monster and kill it in one shot. So that's why we all have cavalry, but they're very fragile in PvP. So in general, ghosting is when you basically do an alliance war, but you send all your troops for a 60-minute rally. What that does is they disappear from your keep, but they don't actually go anywhere. They're just not going to take place in combat because they're assigned to fight whatever monster or player you decided to do a rally on. And you set it for 60 minutes so that it lasts a while. You can do other things. You can make attacks. And what happens is if you get attacked, those troops won't participate in the battle. If you're small enough, you can ghost all of your troops and not have to worry even about getting attacked. So when you go to the enemy server, let's say you want to, attack fairies, and there's like fairies and Ares as statues and stuff on the enemy server during SvS. If you want to attack those, but you don't have a lot of troops, for sure the enemy's just going to come and wipe out all your soldiers. So what you do is you teleport over there and then you send all your soldiers out of the keep. You send them not on marches, but on 1 hour rallies against monsters. And then if you see a weak opponent and you think you can take them on, you cancel all the rallies. Immediately your troops are back and you can attack the opponent. And then as soon as your troops come back, you ghost your troops again. So that's what ghosting is, to give you guys an idea. And first SvS, it's probably going to be the best strategy because nobody's going to have a great defense set up. And there's going to be players who are bigger than you. I mean, people might look at me and be like, wow, he's a big player. But my first SvS, we had an opponent who was 11 billion power and nobody could do anything against them. So there's always going to be a bigger fish. And it's something to be, aware of and ghost your soldiers. Now, specifically ghosting cavalry, the reason you do it as a bigger player is because cavalry are what get attacked first by archers and very easily can get attacked first by ground if you don't have a lot of ground in your base, which earlier I explained it's not a good idea to have a lot of ground in your base because that's kind of overbuilding. Your cavalry will get attacked right away, and your high tier cavalry have a very poor health pool. So they're not good at sustaining hits, but they're worth a lot of points because one tier 14 soldier is worth another tier 14 soldier, even if it's a different troop type. So you're going to get hit by a range send and lose all your high tier cavalry and inflict little damage comparatively speaking. So what you want to do, what I do, is I have a preset set for maximum cavalry, and I just send them all out on rallies. And then I can ignore them for an hour while I do other things, attack people, hold buildings, whatnot. So it's something to be cognizant of. If you haven't built cavalry already, if you don't rally monsters, it's honestly a good idea not to even build that many cavalry, just a few thousand for layers. That's my honest to God suggestion. Because there are other people who will typically do the rallies in an alliance. But if you do both, and there are people who do both, you want to ghost your cavalry because you're going to lose the points exchange if you keep them at home. That's everything for ghosting. Port swapping is kind of advanced, but it's very useful for smaller players and bigger players to gain points. I'll keep it kind of simple because what it is a big player sees you and attacks you, a much smaller player, and you see his attack coming and you have 10 seconds, let's say. You can teleport away, let somebody know, hey, this guy's attacking me, and a much bigger player can teleport into your spot, and that attack will still land on the bigger player. It's a little bit hard to do if you're not on the phone with somebody, but it can be done if it's a long march especially. So if you don't have a good defense or you're worried about getting attacked, that's called port swapping. You guys basically imagine you switch places and the bigger player takes the hit for you and will usually wipe out the attacker's attack. So an example being a 700 million player attacks a 200 million player. That guy can't ghost everything or whatever, has a problem. He teleports away. And a 2 billion player teleports in his place, and that 700 million player's attack is going to get wiped out. So that's an example of port swapping. And you guys don't have to do it, but you should be cognizant of it. You should watch your marches, or you should speed up your marches to be fast enough to where they don't have time to teleport or bubble. Single troop marches are going to be common. You want to hold buildings, but you don't want to send all your troops in there just in case they get attacked. If the building has a timer, it's better to just tickle it with one soldier and a high-level general, or just enough soldiers to get points for it, whatnot. Because if you send all your troops in, somebody bigger is going to send in a march and wipe out those soldiers, and you basically lost those troops for nothing. So in general, it's much better to send one soldier, unless a lot of people decide to send soldiers. For example, you're defending the throne. But keep in mind, when you're defending the throne, you can't bubble, so you have to keep everything ghosted. So bubbling is the best defense, for sure, though, hands down. It's something a lot of people forget. They talk about defense. What can I do for defense? Staying bubbled is the best defense. Like, I'm going to stay bubbled all of SvS. As big as somebody is, you can always get rallied by enough attacks and zeroed, which nobody wants. Hopefully, I explained it pretty well, but there are usually a lot of questions about this. So if you have any questions, please feel free to ask. I saw somebody typing and then they stopped. You'll see on the right an example of ghosting. They had no troops in their keep. And if you have questions, please type them. But a very big player you'll see attacked a very small player. And that small player had nothing at home. So, the traps did a little bit of damage, the archer tower did a little bit of damage, and they received very little damage in return. It's not enough to be great for making points, but you win the exchange and you don't lose points for your server. So, and that's one of the reasons that overbuilding is a very bad idea, because then you can't ghost everything, which is the second best defense compared to bubbling. I don't see any questions, so I'm going to move on. I mentioned this earlier, but there are kind of levels of keeps, if you will, that are unofficially acknowledged. You tend to have small players who are in the ghosting stage. You can ghost all of your troops. And some very good PvP players are like this. If they're good at ghosting, they have a single march that they can send into combat. And then everything else is ghosted. So there's nothing at home when they get attacked. So all they have to do is keep that one march on a rally. And as soon as they see a vulnerability or a vulnerable player, or it's needed somewhere else, they send that march in to do the damage. And then as soon as it comes home, they ghost it again. Something I should mention about ghosting that I didn't bring up. If you get attacked 10 times, that's called force porting. It forcefully teleports you to a random place on the map. That will cancel all your rallies. So a tactic some people do, if you're the type of person who ghosts all your troops, is they'll force port you, and then they'll use a arrest warrant and find where you are, and then attack you while all your troops are home. So you can't just ghost for an hour and then say, okay, I'm going to go for my 30-minute lunch break and come back, because you're going to find that you got force ported and then you got attacked for the 11th time and all your troops were wiped out. So it's something to be cognizant of. The next level after the early stages of a player's life cycle is a trap keep. So this is where you're getting to the point where you can't really ghost all your troops anymore. And if you do leave troops at home, you're going to be losing a lot of points. So that's when you start building all your T1 cavalry, your T1 wall. Because, at that point, it doesn't matter how many troops you have. You want to start building a defense, but what's called a trap defense. Trap is a little misleading. It's just a very practical defense using tier 1s. But it's left over from an age when tier 1s weren't that known. If you guys don't know, one tier 1 equals 2 power. So, 200 million, 300 million tier 1s, they're only worth, 400 to 600 million power. I'm sorry, that math took so long. But they'll inflict a lot of damage on an unsuspecting person. So it's very trappy. It was back in the day. So people would say, oh, you're a trap keep because you're trying to be unsuspecting with low power and have people hit you. And that is a way to play the game. There are people who do that. So, and they were typically not worth it to attack. You'll see nowadays with tier 1 walls, I mentioned it earlier, ground marches and sometimes cavalry marches. If you don't have enough defending troops in the trap keep, those tier 1s don't mean anything. They'll get raised, zeroed in a heartbeat. So you have to have enough range to back up those tier 1s. It happened actually in the most recent battlefield. The trap player in our alliance, who I won't name, sent me a report and said, she wasn't that inquisitive, but she asked me to look at it. Basically, her tier 1 wall of 200 million only had 50, 60,000 archers behind it. So the cavalry, the guy sent a cavalry attack. He came in and zeroed her and took minimal casualties. And it's because the wall doesn't deal that much damage. It's just a tier 1 wall. Imagine a wall. You need archers to back it up, or siege to back it up. After the quote unquote trap level, you sort of transition into the big level, and nobody's going to hit that for a long time. I won't hit that for a long time. It can start at 1 to 2 billion power, but you usually see it much later, like 10 billion, 15 billion, 20 billion. And that is where you start building a lot more of everything. It's just something to be cognizant of, because it's at some point you do transition out of being this quote unquote trap keep, especially when you hit tier 15 and 16 soldiers. Those become, the percent buffs on those do a lot more than percent buffs on lower soldiers. So are there any questions about this? This is really just a basic informational slide, but if there is anything. Yeah, meat shield is another good name for tier one wall. That's why I typically use wall, because people tend to think of a wall as kind of defensive and absorption of damage, not like a big damage dealer. Tier ones can do a lot, but you have to put a lot of flat refines on them. And even then, flat refines only go so far. So, flat refines, meaning when you refine your gear, there's a percentage amount and a flat plus 1,000 to 1,500, percent, depends on what you're refining. Those can deal damage, but they're not, especially at the later game, they're not as efficient as other things. For trap keep, when you say need range troop to back it up, are you recommending using a defense gem with range buff? Yeah, that's a good point, actually. Actually, I think somebody asked this last time, and I didn't have it in the slideshow. Let me see if I have anything. No, I don't on it. So, yeah, Tipsy's asking when we're backing up the tier one wall or meat shield, the defense with ranged, should the defense general have ranged? And typically, yeah. There's 6 pieces of gear in the game. 2 pieces deal damage, 2 pieces add to the defense, and 2 pieces add HP that you put on your generals. So a lot of people way back when were recommending Boadicea or Boudica for the defense general. She's the Celtic general, if you guys don't remember what she looks like. And she buffed cavalry. The problem is a percent buff on a tier one cavalry. It's like you're buffing the stats that's like in the hundreds to be 115. But you want ideally to have a range general, because that 15% or whatever attack bonus on a soldier with 1,000 base stats, that's going to be 1,150. That's 150 more damage than if you were just buffing the tier one wall. So my generals that I use are I use Leonidas and like one of the free ones. I have to change my assistant general, but Leonidas buffs I think ground and ranged. And it's ideal because the ranged deal the most damage. You don't really use the tier ones for damage. So rather than buffing cavalry, because that's your meat shield wall, you want to buff the ranged because they'll be dealing a lot more damage. And that's an attack specifically. For the gear, as I mentioned, there's 2 gears that attack, 2 gears that add defense, 2 gears that add HP. Typically for the attacking gears, it's all stuff that buffs ranged attack or just in-city attack in general. In my opinion, like a full choreo set of Civ gear specifically is the best set. But if you're not going to be getting a lot of Civ gear, like most people, I mean, I probably won't get all of the choreo. Achaemenid and Parthian are the next best for it. So that being said, I typically buff flat defense and flat HP for the cavalry to absorb as much possible damage, and then I buff archer attack to chew through the enemy as fast as possible. That way, your meat shield is trying to take all the damage it can, while the ranged is dealing all the damage it can. That's the best split, I would say, on your defense general and their gear in general. And then why ranged and not the other? I mean, Zorro answered it, but for those of you who probably don't read the chat, Tiffany asked why ranged specifically and not the other types. For one, about Siege, Zorro made a very good point that I didn't mention. When you do Siege, I said you go all in. You really have to go all in. Siege don't heal like other troops. You have to repair them in the workshop or the trap workshop, whatever it's called. And that's a lot of gems. And you have to build a lot of Siege to defend Siege, if that makes sense. Because you're going to get rallies of just pure Siege to wipe out your Siege. So you always have to have more Siege when you play Siege. That's just how Siege works in the game, because it's Siege against Siege only. And that costs a lot of gems. That being said, you're going to get hit by siege anyways, and at a certain point, you just have to accept it. It's a little bit difficult to deal with if you're building a lot of ranged and you're getting hit by siege, but you'll still trade pretty well than if you go half-assed on siege and get hit by siege. So, you asked why ranged. Cavalry are really a glass cannon when it comes to PvP. One hit, they might do okay, but then they melt to even ranged layers will melt them because their HP is so low. So cavalry, outside of like All Stars Battlefield, are not that useful. Ground have their uses, but in the defense, they're not really a damage dealer. They're more absorptionate or absorbing of damage. Mainly because cavalry have this problem too. Ground and cavalry have to get through the defensive layers to reach the ranged. The enemy's ranged is shooting at you from far away, but there's a bunch of different groups of 1,000 soldiers that you have to attack through to get through. And it takes time to do that, and then the battle ends, and you've not dealt as much damage, or your infantry got chewed through by the ranged by the time they got there. So while the whole time you're chewing through layers, they're dealing damage to you directly if you're going infantry. There are builds that are kind of funny that exist but are very effective. One of them is like a ground siege build or something. I saw it, but I never played with it or really did it that much myself. I mean, if people are curious, I can find it somewhere in the old server I was in and get the reports and look through it. But that was back when I wasn't that good also. But in general, the concept is that ranged can sit behind the tier 1 wall and deal damage, whereas melee is fighting up by the tier 1 wall, and if they're your primary damage dealers, melee meaning cavalry and ground, if they're your primary damage dealers, they're going to be taking damage at the same time alongside the tier 1 wall. And then siege is just, you really have to go all in with siege, and it's gem heavy. So I hope that answers your question. Okay, got it. I see you're typing something, Rainmaker, so I'm going to drink some water. Defense General buffs stacks. So Defense General and Assistant Defense General are the same thing as the Attacking General. It's the one I showed you up here, if I can find the stupid slide for it. So it's the same as this, basically, what applies. It's the same as attacking. You're attacking general and defending general. Did that answer the question, Rainmaker? Okay, great. No worries, Chuck. I hope you have a great night. I know you're here for the first one, so I don't know if you're missing much. Oops. I got excited. We were on. Geez, where were we? Oh, we were here. Okay, great. Yeah, it helps to see it a second time over, probably. So that should answer the types of keep. This is a slide dedicated to specific marches. I already mentioned this 20, 30, 50% ratio of your main troop type. So if you're sending ranged, 20% of ranged, tier whatever, 30% of ranged, tier whatever, 50% of ranged, tier whatever. You can do this with each troop tier. It's the ratio I follow for all of them. The exception being siege. Siege is a little bit specific. But for most of us, we're going to be doing ranged early on. This is the best march to follow. So, and then 500 to 1,000 of each of your layers, depending on your march size. So that's for ranged marches. Siege marches specifically, there's two types. There's small siege and big siege, or big siege and small siege. So small siege is what you send first in a rally. If you hear somebody say small siege rally, which you might hear from experienced players, small siege is tier 11 siege, and the concept is that tier 11s are worth a lot more than tier 14, 15, and 16. So if you're fighting a player with really high tier siege, a bunch of people can get together with small siege and destroy all of his high tier siege, because you attack the high tier siege first. Basically, you attack the highest tier of troop first and then go down the list. So like tier 14 or tier 16 are targeted first, then 15, 14, 13, 12, etc. So small siege is meant to clear out the enemy's big siege. And then once their big siege is cleared out, you send in your own big siege to clear out the rest of their basically smaller siege and ranged. And then once the smaller siege and ranged are cleared out, this is the concept behind big and small siege. You can go in with either a ranged send or a melee, a ground send, and wipe out all our remaining layers in tier 1 wall. So to give you an idea of why, if the enemy is very heavily into siege defense, it's almost impossible to crack without you breaking that siege defense first. Because if you send a ranged attack, their siege is going to clear out your ranged, which is your primary damage dealer, and then you're left with, layers. It's nothing. So you want to clear out their siege first. The problem is siege is often the last thing to get targeted. So you want to, break their siege first, as I said earlier. So only siege can attack siege effectively with the bonus. So small siege trades better for big siege. So you gain points that way. Even if you break even, their big siege is broken, but your small siege is broken. Now the rally will send big siege, which outranges their smaller siege, and you can typically deal enough damage to clear out their remaining siege and their ranged, because once the siege layers are out, the attacker's siege will start attacking the defender's ranged right away. So the siege bypasses the tier 1 wall, which it would otherwise have to chew through for a long time. So that's the concept, is that this your siege clears their siege, your small siege clears their siege, then your big siege clears their remaining siege layers and their ranged. Once the ranged is gone, you send in, your infantry or your ranged, clear up their tier 1 wall. That's the concept, fully fleshed out. It's not going to be that common the first few SVSs. I mean, nobody's going to have a siege send. I don't have a siege send. So, but later on in the game, you'll start seeing it more. Or if you look online and are curious about siege, you'll see it more. So just so we're clear on the concept of big siege, small siege, and the follow-up attacks. Ground marches, I typically follow the same ratios of my ranged marches. Again, because your highest tier gets targeted first. It's very good at clearing out the tier 1 wall because it has such a high health pool. The tier 1s have trouble dealing with tier 14, tier 13, and tier 12 ground, not even to mention tier 15. So ground marches are very good at clearing out those tier 1 walls. That's why it follows up the siege march. I highly recommend not using cavalry in PvP. It's, like I said, exceptionally prone to damage. And in the beginning, everybody thinks cavalry is the thing, because it can damage monsters. You can get high buffs on it. It's the first thing I focused on in the old server I played on, the first server I played on. I had really high cavalry buffs, and I thought it was the greatest thing ever. And I took them into combat, and cavalry were trash, especially unsupported. Unsupported meaning not in a rally, because they can be useful in rallies. So, and the reason being is because they fight in the front line. Archers attack them first. Most people use archers in PvP, so they're just hard countered by almost everybody. So just to be clear, if you built a lot of cavalry for monster hunting, don't use it in PvP. It's better to just bubble and wait it out until you have range for PvP. Are there any questions on this? I know there were a lot of questions on small versus big siege, so hopefully that explanation answered everything. All right, good. So rallies, I touched on big and small siege. You'll hear that a lot. Ranged rallies are pretty simple. Everybody just sends their ranged send with layers to the rallies. A point I want to make on rallies is you hear this misconception. It's almost like a superstition that the last person to join a rally has the buffs that will set the rally. You'll hear that for buildings. Some people will say it in your alliance. You don't have to make fun of them because for a long time, you can make fun of them if you want, but for a long time, that was like the accepted concept. It was like, why do birds fly? Because it's magic, you know? But after extensive testing, because rallies are so complicated, there was a lot of hearsay. But after extensive testing, it was discovered everybody's troops just have the buffs that they have from the player. So my troops use my buffs, your troops use your buffs. I do want to, make that clear. Forgot where I was even going. I launched into a tangent. Ranged rallies, you just want to send ranged and layers. Sometimes this next bullet point applies to both ranged and siege rallies. If you don't have a lot of troops, you're not built for PvP yet, you have a lot of cavalry, let's say, you can send just layers to rallies and they'll be really effective. I want to give an example here. Zorro was part of it. We were doing Arctic Barbarians, and I can't even get like an 800 million Arctic Barbarian yet. But Zorro joined me, Aurora joined me, a few other people in our alliance joined me, and they just sent some layers and some of their troops. But it more than made, I got less casualties than I did on a 600 million Arctic Barbarian attacking a 1 billion Arctic Barbarian with like 1200% buffs, simply because each layer functions individually per player in a rally. So that was a lot of words, I know, but what that means is that if you're attacking somebody and everybody sent a ground layer of tier 1, they'll have to chew through each ground layer of tier 1s individually before they can move on to the next tier of ground layers, it's a really important thing to know because it means that you effectively, two players have just doubled, like two people in a rally have just doubled the number of layers that the enemy has to chew through. So it greatly increases the damage that your ranged troops can do on a single target, whereas now the enemy has multiple individual targets of layers they have to chew through. I know that might be a little bit much to swallow, but just more people means more better. So